The little wooden box. It was your standard blue-collar workday. In at 9, worked for 8 hours, out by 5. My dad was on his way home to have a standard blue-collar evening when something not so standard happened. Driving home from work, his car was hit by some douchebag pickup truck driver on the freeway trying to merge into the fast lane. He merged into my dad instead. My dad's car was sandwiched between his big-ass truck and the concrete divider. It came out of the accident looking like a Picasso rendering of meat grinder. My dad fared only slightly better. He broke several ribs and his left arm looked like it had been run through a cubist meat grinder. The surgeons couldn't save it. The doctor said my dad was lucky to have lost his left arm since he's right-handed. Lucky, the doctor said. How is it they all have such god-awful bedside manner? My dad had to stay in the hospital a good 2 months, long enough to rack up a breathtaking amount of debt in the form of medical bills. When my dad finally got out, he was nowhere close to functional. He had a long road of physical therapy and routine hospital visits ahead of him before he could even go back to work, assuming they'd even have a job for him to go back to. He was next to useless around the house. You'd never guess how much you have to use your hand for. Well, damn near everything. What this amounted to was a giant crock of shit for me, my mom, and my sister to deal with on a daily basis, to say nothing of how my dad must have felt useless, powerless, a burden to our family. I'm not telling you all this to get sympathy. My family and I have had our fill of that, and it doesn't do much for anyone. I'm telling you this so you understand why we were so grateful for it at first. The little wooden box. My dad started seeing a psychiatrist about a month after being released from the hospital. He's not much for getting mental help, one of those guys that seems to think people get fixed by same ways cars do, and don't really understand why someone can't just take a look under the hood and fix themselves. But as he put it, he'd felt too shitty for too long and had to do something about it. His doctor recommended the psychiatrist to him about the only useful thing that doctor did. The psychiatrist, the dweeby guy with an equally dweeby Dr. Freud goatee, diagnosed my dad with post-operative depression. Not that terms like that tell you jack shit about what the person's going through. After a couple of unproductive sessions, the psychiatrist decides to try something unorthodox. The psychiatrist takes out this little box made of cedar, pine, or some other light wood. It's small. You can fit a dime store book in there, but nothing else. And mostly plain, most modest scroll work in the corners, but little else in the way of decoration. Whenever you feel angry or sad or frustrated, the psychiatrist said, I want you to take some time to yourself, alright? What you're going to do is then take this box, open it up, and stuff all the bad feelings inside. You keep doing that until you get all that icky stuff out. And when you've done that, you're going to close that box, put it away, and you're going to focus on getting better until you need that box again. My dad spent a good hour stomping and swearing when he got home from that session. Lots of talk about pretentious medical professionals, wasting money, and some creative ideas for alternative place the psychiatrist could put his little wooden box. I half expected my dad to take out his frustration on the box and break it in two. Once he was done ranting and raving, however, he just set it on the shelf in my parents' room. A week and a half after my dad got the little wooden box, my dad's boss called the house. He told my dad that he had to let my dad go and replace him. In plain terms, my dad was fired. Time is money, as he said, and my dad was taking too much of both. There was no screaming and cursing this time. Getting fired took the fight out of him. After hanging up the phone, my dad locked himself in my parents' room. My mom and sister tried to get him to come out and talk, but he wasn't having any of it. I almost decided to help, but I figured my dad might have needed a little time to himself. Turns out I was right. After 3 hours, my dad comes out of there with the biggest smile I've ever seen, and starts making mac and cheese for dinner. It was an absolute mess. He got flour and dry pasta on every flat surface of the kitchen, and the sauce was full of cheese chunks that hadn't been able to cut properly. But that smile never once left his face, and I'll tell you what, that shitty mac and cheese was the best dinner I've ever had. It was all thanks to that box. My dad sat down that thing for 3 hours, dumped all his frustration into it, and came out of my parents' room a changed man. After using the box, he wouldn't get discouraged when his missing arm stopped him from doing something. He'd just come back at it twice the effort, and eventually he'd get it done. He went to therapy with a smile and came back exhausted, but still smiling. When his job search wasn't going well, or the medical bills got too expensive, even if he had just a hard time brushing his teeth, he locked himself in the room with that little box and came out a couple hours ready to take on the world again. My family and I were grateful for that little wooden box. It was a godsend. When we needed one most, it's not the nature of things to just magically get better, though. Miracle wooden boxes aside. It started with the little bumps in the middle of the night. A week or two after my dad used his little box for the first time. Unsettling but too worrisome, my sister and I talked about it a little. But when you're talking about it in the middle of the day, you find easy explanations. Older houses crack and pop as they cool off with changes in the weather. These explanations seemed thin when I sat in bed listening to noises that sounded not at all like cracks and pops, but I hung in there. As soon as they were more of an annoyance than anything else, it had to stop there. I must have contented myself with that easy explanation. It didn't stop there, however. Bits of our house would go from warm to freezing in seconds. I'd never known our house to be drafty, so when my mom and sister chalked it up seams in the house caused drafty, I kind of found it hard to believe. Now, a little about me, I'm a curious person. I see something I don't understand, I stare at it. Think about it, poke it, prod it until I do. I'm not going to start jumping at shouters for no goddamn reason, but if it walks and talks like a duck... So I did a little research. Our house was around a long time ago before we moved in. So I figured there might be an unpleasant bit of history that could shed some light on what was going on. Went the whole nine. Went to the courthouse to get the original permit, asked around at the city planning department, checked newspapers. I expected to find an old owner who died tragically, or maybe a dysfunctional family that might have left some bad blood in the house. Instead I found nothing. Nothing especially dark, at least, or even out of the ordinary. Just a little previous tenants and an old article about my neighborhood's construction. Skeptic that I am, I found myself a little disappointed. Everyone loves a good ghost story. I let that matter sit for another week or two. My curiosity had not been satisfied, however, and the bumps in the night, the footsteps where they shouldn't have been, didn't help. I was forced to consider a possibility. I could have preferred to ignore the little wooden box. I was sure it had nothing to do with anything, but I had a hard time convincing myself that it was a coincidence that everything started happening after my dad brought it home. I called my dad's psychologist, hearing that my dad was putting the box to good use, put him right over the moon. After he settled down a little, I asked him about the box. I half expected to hear how he brought it off some seedy vendor, or found it in the basement of an old mansion. I was disappointed to hear that profoundly mundane explanation that it was a woodworking project given to him by his nephew. Before I called it quits on my little investigation, I wanted to take a look at the box itself. I doubted I'd find anything, but if I didn't take a look, it would eat at me until I did. My sister said I shouldn't. It was an invasion of my dad's privacy, she said, but I figured what he didn't know wouldn't hurt him. So when my mom took my dad to therapy one day, I decided to check out. Little box, you know. The box wasn't hidden or anything out of reach, just sitting on my dad's bedside table. I wasn't sure what I was looking at exactly. I just wanted to look at it, if anything. Hold it in my hand, see if I felt any kind of vibe coming off it. So I picked it up and immediately struck by its weight. The wood wasn't heavy. I remembered my dad waving around after he first brought it home like it was nothing. But the box felt dense somehow. I tilted the box in my hands. Nothing inside shifted or rolled around as the box moved, although attempting to curb my curiosity a little, I couldn't completely deny that I was snooping on something personal my dad's. I ran my hands over the scroll work on the edge of the box, feeling the uneven finish along the sides. There's only so much you can do with an empty box. However, so I decided to indulge my curiosity a little more and open it. I had barely managed to open it a crack before I heard car doors closing. My parents were home. I hurried and closed it and set it back on its table and threw it on the wall by accident. It seemed half as heavy as it had been before. Though I'd probably just adjusted to its weight, setting the box down more carefully, I noticed an odd odor in the air. Whatever was in the box smelled like burnt motor oil. I turned on the fan in my parents' room, hoping it would take out the smell. I dashed into my room as the front door opened, flopped on my bed, and opened up a book. My parents said hi as they headed back to their room and closed their door. 15 minutes passed without an incident. I decided I was probably clean, and breathed a sigh of relief. That night, however, maybe the next morning actually, I was awakened by an odd noise. They were not new at this point, but I felt especially uneasy for some reason. I listened for a moment, hoping I could identify it as something 100% normal. I was somewhat relieved when I recognized it. TV static. Not wanting to add a high electric bill to my parents' long list of worries, I willed myself to shake off my lingering anxiousness and get up to go to the family room and turn it off. Walking into the living room, I saw a figure sitting in a chair in front of the TV. My dad, silhouetted by the static of the TV, was playing. I asked my dad what he was doing watching the static in the middle of the night. For a moment, he didn't answer. Then in a tired voice I recognized from the first days after he came home from the hospital, he told me to go back to sleep and stop bothering him. He picked the remote up off the end table, left the chair, and turned down the TV a little. I was more than a little curious about the sudden change in the mood from the past few days, but decided it would be best not to push the issue, and went back to my room. As I got into bed, something bizarre occurred to me. when my dad grabbed the remote, I didn't see his shoulders move to reach across to the left. I dismissed it as half-sleeping brain playing tricks on me and tried to go back to sleep. As my sister and I got ready for school the next morning, my dad emerged from my parents' room, sleepy-eyed and yawning. My sister asked if he slept well. He said no, he had trouble sleeping. I told him that looking at TV set in the middle of the night wasn't likely to help a bit of insomnia. Maybe not the greatest thing to joke about, but I get pissy when I don't get enough sleep. My dad looked at me all confused. He asked what the hell I was talking about. I asked him what the hell he was talking about. Again, tact is not my strong suit when I'm tired. This carried on for a minute or two before my mom told us both to knock it off. When I cooled it off a little, it occurred to me that my dad had seemed genuinely confused by my question. He didn't remember finding him in front of the TV that night. Maybe it was a weird side effect of the 1,000,001 meds he was on. I thought nothing more of it until the week afterwards when I came home to find my sister having an argument with my dad. She was complaining that he had yelled at her from our parents' room to stop making so much noise when she got home. My dad insisted he'd been napping for hours and she was imagining things. When I walked into the family room, my dad stormed out, complaining about having to deal with this shit after his box broke. I asked him what was wrong with the box. I tried not to appear nervous, remembering my clumsy handling of while my mom and dad were away the previous week. My dad said one of the hinges on it broke, and it wasn't closed all the way. I offered to try to fix the hinge. My dad just lost his shit, threatening to ground me for half a year if I touched the box. We all stood glaring at each other for a minute before my dad sighed and left the room. He shut himself in my parents' room, probably to use the box. My sister and I decided to focus on our homework, and our dad came out. A couple of hours later, he emerged from our parents' room, shuffling his feet and acting sorry. He apologized for yelling at us. He still didn't remember hollering at my sister about making noise, but he apologized for it anyway. We said it was okay and went back to our homework. Not wanting to add to the increasing amount of eerie shit going on in our house, we tried again to find easy explanations. People sometimes get forgetful as they age. Hell, I can barely keep my own schedule straight. Am I supposed to be in the prime of my life? A guy in the mid-40s with all kinds of drugs and unpronounceable names pumping through him all day? Things will get forgotten, and that's likely to make a person a little frustrated. Perfectly natural. Perfectly normal. This is what my mom told me and my sister when we talked to her about Dad forgetting things we'd all seen and heard him do. Neither of us believed it. Our mom knew it. Our mom didn't believe it. And we knew it. But that little box was what kept our dad going. None of us wanted things to go back to the days before the box, so none of us called anyone else out on our little merry-go-round denial. These slips of memory got increasingly hard to ignore, and were never pleasant. It was always my dad yelling at someone or stomping around upstairs while the rest of us were cooking dinner or watching TV. We did our best not to point out these strange things. We talked about it amongst ourselves, but never in front of our dad. He's not stupid, though. He could tell that we were keeping things from him. Try as we might, it was too difficult to know that he would and wouldn't remember. And we might occasionally let something slip. When this happened, when any of us received that blank stare, that meant we just mentioned something he didn't remember. We did our best to change the subject and kept bringing it up again. My dad noticed when this happened, and that pissed him off royal. I guess that's where I get my aggressive curiosity. This meant more and more time spent alone with the box to calm himself down. As my dad used the box more and more, however, his memory slipped because more and more frequent, he would forget things more and more often, and his mood during these slips would get worse and worse. What started as irritability turned into rage and eventually violence. Late one night, my sister woke up to get herself a midnight snack and found our dad standing in the middle of the kitchen with all the lights out, staring out the window into the backyard. She asked him what he was doing and didn't say anything. She told him to stop scaring her and go back to bed. My dad still didn't say anything. Instead, he took out a pan from the sink and threw it at her. Thankfully, my sister was able to dodge and run back to her room where she cried herself to sleep. And actually, my dad remembered nothing in the morning. That's where I drew the line. I understood wanting to be considerate and giving my dad some leeway on his road to recovery, but that shit was inexcusable. And my family deserved better than this Jekyll and Hyde bullshit. The next time my dad got into this mood, I'd call them on it. It would get ugly, but it needed to be done. I figured I wouldn't have to wait long. I figured right. The night after I decided I needed to level with my dad about everything, I woke up in the middle of the night to the sound of static of the TV. This would be the third time this month I'd found my dad sitting in the dark in the living room, staring at a dead channel on TV, fighting a growing sense of unease at having to confront my dad. I got up and went downstairs to the family room. I found him just as I had before, sitting in the darkness, silence apart from the TV. By way of greeting, I told him he would have trouble getting sleep staring at TV all night. He told me to mind my own goddamn business and go back to bed. That sent my politeness right out the window. I told him he had to cut this shit off. He was scaring the hell out of my mom and sister with his behavior, and it was tearing our family apart. He wasn't doing himself any favors either. He just ended up angrier and was relying on that little box more and more. I told him he had to end the vicious circle here and talk about what was bothering him like an adult. My dad was silent for a moment. I nearly yelled at him just to say something, anything, when I noticed shoulders heaving. I thought he might have started crying before I started it. He was laughing. The old bastard was laughing at me. I told him that, out of all the reactions he should have had what I told him, laughter was the least appropriate. My dad got a hold of himself and said I should go get the box for him. We could talk after he spent a little time with it. I figured he was probably stalling, but I went to grab the box anyway. That laugh had severely unnerved me, and I wanted to get out of the room as soon as possible. I walked back upstairs and opened my parents' door as quietly as I could. My mom is a pretty heavy sleeper, so is my dad, when he's actually sleeping. I don't want to be careless and wake her up on accident. My eyes hadn't adjusted to the dark, not wanting to bash my toes on the furniture in my parents' room. I turned on my phone and used the screen for minimal light. I aimed the weak light at the nightstand and was surprised to see the box with the lid wide open. I walked closer and was hit with a strong odor, burnt motor oil. I moved to cover my mouth and accidentally shined the phone light onto my mom and my dad. They are both in bed, sleeping. My dad stirs and mutters something as he rolls over. I stare at my sleeping parents. Uncomprehending, I started backing out of the room, shaking my head as if I could make sense of mess with mindless denial. Backing out of the room, I bump into something behind me. I turn around and I'm greeted with a nightmare version of my dad. His eyes are bloodshot and glaring at me in abject rage, but they are also watery, leaking tears down his contorted face. His mouth is twisted in a grimace pain, no of anguish. I feel feverish heat rolling off of him, and I'm overwhelmed with waves of horrible feelings. Anger, depression, pain, exhaustion. It all washes over me, and I'm paralyzed by it all, and I can do nothing but gape at this warped twin of my dad. Before I can begin to process the horror standing in front of me, the thing wearing my dad's face pushes me. I fall down the stairs as it looks with me with that horrible mixture of everything awful that a human being can feel. I hit the bottom of the stairs hard enough to knock the wind out of me. I try to yell for my parents, but I can't get anything louder than wheeze out. I look around to find something to grab onto and pull myself up. Before I can find anything, I can feel myself being lifted by the throat. Already short of breath, I see dark spots appear before my eyes. Before my vision fades completely, I see my nightmare dad twisted face leering at me as he lifts me in the air with his left arm. His left arm. I look again at the arm that shouldn't be there and see black and shriveled skin. What little flesh it had was hanging off in decaying chunks, and bones showed through gaps in the skin. My stomach heaves to no avail as my throat is crushed and my lungs burn. As I lose consciousness, a final disturbing thought fires through my dying mind. The thing holding me from my throat. This vision of rage and agony and misery that's been haunting my family. I set it free. You don't need to die to leave a ghost. You cram enough suffering into one place. Force it from head and into a plain wooden box for someone to open and unleash onto the world. And you'll get a tormented spirit as surely as if you died a tragic death. Looking at the thing one last time, its face contorted into a mask of misery as it holds me on by the throat. I have just enough time to pray that my mom and sister don't have to learn this the hard way.